parts of our lives here today, especially on a rainy morning like this, to absolutely pack this room with people we've known our whole lives to people we've met in the last year on the campaign. It's unbelievable to look around at all of your faces. And again, we just thank you from the bottom of our hearts for coming out here and for taking the campaign to where it's been right now. Because the success of where we are right now, going into the last 5 months, without question, is because all of you. Now, as Sonny and some others alluded to, we have a criminal justice system that is broken. Our state is bankrupt because we are over-incarcerating and we cannot afford it any longer with the budget crisis that we have. We need to be putting that funding into things that actually make us safer and keep people from going to prison in the first place. We just had the Supreme... Thank you. We just had the Supreme Court a few weeks ago rule that our prison conditions were unconstitutional. The United States Supreme Court, this is unprecedented, said it was cruel and unusual punishment for people to be in our prisons because it's so crowded that they can't get the health care and mental health care for the minimum constitutional requirements. We have a broken system that we need to reform, and I have been spending my entire career reforming that system, which is why I'm running for district attorney right now. Now, as we make these much needed and long overdue reforms, we need to do them in a way that is safe and in a way that is fair. And I'm running for district attorney to make San Francisco the safest and the fairest big city in the country. Now, I'm going to do that in 2 ways. 1, by building collaborations, and for 2, on focusing on what works to make us safer. So let me talk a little bit about both of those things that seem totally obvious, but in criminal justice policy, they're extremely rare. First, let's talk about collaboration. Many of you know my story, that I've worked and looked at this issue from every angle. I started out my very first job at Walden House Adolescent Facility, helping young people turn their lives around, counseling delinquent kids. After going to Stanford Law School, I worked at Legal Services for Children, providing free legal services to young people in San Francisco. Later, I worked at the Haywood Burns Institute, which focuses on the overrepresentation of youth of color in the juvenile justice system and how we can make our policies and practices fairer for all youth. So I'm rooted in community-based and advocacy organizations. Later, I went to work for the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, and in that role as Deputy Director, had to help coordinate all the different criminal justice agencies in the city, the Police Department, the Sheriff's Department, the DA, the Probation Department, all law enforcement agencies that typically work in their own silos. We had to figure out a way to get everyone to work together to collectively make us safer. Later, I was appointed to the Police Commission, which is a civilian oversight body for the police department, as many of you know. We set policy for the department as well as handled the police discipline process. On the Police Commission, I started working extremely closely with people from the chief and command staff down to the line officers. And one thing I realized very quickly from my close relationships with people in the community and my close relationships with people in law enforcement, they really weren't that far apart in how they actually felt about the problems facing our communities. They were not used to working together, there was a lot of distrust there, and there were not individual connections. And so I made it my mission to bring people together to build collaboration around pragmatic reforms. And when I went over to Berkeley to found the Berkeley Center for Criminal Justice at Berkeley Law School, that's exactly what I did. The mission of the center is to bring law enforcement and community together to build collaboration around pragmatic criminal justice reforms. And let me tell you about one particular issue we focused on as an example, and that is getting jobs for people coming out of prison. When you think about it, law enforcement should care about that issue just as much as advocates and community members do. Because if you have someone coming out of prison with no job, waking up their first day out of prison, unsure how they're going to support themselves, how they're going to feed their family, even what they're going to do with the next 12 hours of their day, that is a ticket to trouble. Versus having someone come back to the community, wake up with a job, with somewhere to go, build self-esteem, support their family, that is a no-brainer from a public safety perspective. So I was able to start a project to push reforms on this issue statewide and brought together the most unlikely group of people you can possibly imagine. 1/3 were from law enforcement and corrections, 1/3 were from community and advocacy organizations, and 1/3 were from the employment community, employers, because if you're going to hire people, you need employers' voices at the table. Starting with the law enforcement community, we had the head of the prison guards union, and anyone who's followed criminal justice reform or even California politics generally, they have been the biggest impediment to rational criminal justice reform in this state for the last 20 plus years. But I got them to come to the table and agree to work together. We had the Republican District Attorney of San Diego, Bonnie Dumanis, at the table, and other law enforcement officials from up and down the state. So that was a third law enforcement. Then we had a third community and advocacy leaders, including folks who were formerly incarcerated, who had spent 20 or more years behind bars and were now advocating for other people following them out of prison to help them get jobs. And then a third were employers like Goodwill Industries here in San Francisco, Debbie Alvarez Rodriguez, that hires a lot of ex-offenders, and other great programs like that. So it all looked great on paper. I was going to bring these people together and magically get them to agree. I walked into the very first meeting. I was going to facilitate 3 all-day meetings over the course of a year to get us down to these key recommendations. And I walked in on the first day. I saw the head of the prison guards union sitting right here with a very sour look on his face, frowning across the table at someone who had been formerly incarcerated for 20 years, frowning right back at him. And I thought, this is going to be a little dicey. And the first hour was really rough. People had very strong emotions that they needed to get off their chest, and I quickly realized that I needed to let them do that. After that hour of heated conversation, when we started to focus on what mattered to people, everyone around the table realized we all want to get jobs for people coming out of prison. It benefits all of us. It's something we can all buy into. And over the course of those 3-day meetings, we were able to get a set of very concrete recommendations that whether you're a Democrat or Republican from Northern California or Southern California, a law enforcement person or a community person, you are going to sign on to because people who represent your interests signed on to this. So that is exactly the approach that I'll take to the DA's office. Let's bring everybody together and see. Thank you. Let's bring everybody together, have all the views at the table, and I will be able to hammer out consensus to actually move reforms forward. Now let me talk about what works a little bit. That seems very straightforward, but unfortunately criminal justice policy has not been driven by what works. That's why we're in the mess we're in right now. It's been driven by political opportunism and fear and anecdote. We have one horrible incident happen somewhere in the state, and then suddenly we pass some law affecting millions and millions of people who had nothing to do with that incident. We need to base it on what works, and let me give an example of that. In the middle of the last decade, you'll remember, homicides were very high in San Francisco, close to 100 for several years in a row, and we were struggling. And I was in the mayor's office at the time, and they asked me to look at what some of the national models were that we could possibly bring to San Francisco. And one of the things I recommended was something called hotspots policing, which is very straightforward. You do a data analysis, you map out on a map where the crime is, mark it with dots, and then you put the cops on the dots. Yeah. What could be simpler than that, right? Yeah. Well, there is a problem though. We didn't have the data to do this very simple analysis. So I hustled and got a grant to bring the leading expert from Harvard out to do this study for us, and what he found was astonishing. Over 50% of the homicides and shootings in San Francisco occur in less than 2% of the landmass of the city. So 98% of this city is the safest city in the country. We have 2% where we have extreme pockets of violence. And so as I moved over to the police commission, Chief Fong and her top staff, some of whom are here tonight, put in a plan called the Violence Reduction Initiative. And what that initiative did was focus on 5 zones in that 2%, which were Bayview, Viz Valley, Western Addition, the Mission, and the Tenderloin. And we focused our resources on those 5 areas. We shared it publicly at the police commission. The community had the same information, and because of a lot of hard work from the community and from law enforcement, we reduced homicides in 2009 by over 50% in San Francisco. That was the biggest one-year drop in the country. We had not seen those levels since the 1960s. We won an award from the Justice Department for innovations in law enforcement. It's not rocket science, folks. It's very straightforward stuff that we just haven't been doing here in San Francisco. And as DA, I pledge I will bring the best practices from around the country, see how they fit in San Francisco. We are very unique. We can't just plop them down here. But there's some really good ideas that have been proven to work to reduce violence. I'm going to bring them here to San Francisco as district attorney. So let me talk about one other thing about what works and what doesn't work before I talk about the campaign and close up. The death penalty does not work, and I will not seek it in San Francisco under any circumstances. Now, I come to that position, we don't have to get into the ideology or morality of it and have those battles. All you need to focus on to reach that obvious outcome is a three-pronged approach, which is what I take to all policy matters. Does it make us safer? Is it cost-effective? And is it fair and equitable? The death penalty, clearly no, no, and no. Number one, it does not make us safer. My colleagues at Berkeley and elsewhere have studied this. It is not a deterrent to crime. It does not increase public safety. It does not make us safer. So why would we do it in the first place? But then let's look at the cost effectiveness. We would save $1 billion over 5 years if we took everyone on death row, put them in life in prison without the possibility of parole, so they're never getting out. Public safety is completely protected, but we have $1 billion to spend over the next 5 years on all the things that have been cut with our budget crisis. We could fund, thank you. SFUSD is putting out pink slips. Let's keep the teachers in the school. Oakland and other places are laying off police officers. We need police officers doing community policing on the streets to make us safer. We're cutting the social services that can keep people from getting involved in crime for the first place. We should spend that $1 billion on that, not wasting it on something that doesn't work. My last point quickly. The death penalty is not remotely fair and equitable. Every single study shows if you're a person of color, you are far more likely to get the death penalty than if you're not. It's an open and shut case. It's a yes or no answer. No, I will not seek the death penalty in San Francisco. And that is the approach I'll take to all policy issues, is to ask those three questions so we can look at them rationally and analytically and decide how to spend our resources. So let me talk a little bit about the campaign. This, as you can see from this morning, this campaign has been going phenomenally well. We have 1,500 people who have signed up as supporters for this campaign. Many of you, can we get a hand for that? We have the full list actually posted outside. We didn't have room on the walls here to post it because it's like 24 pages long. But outside you can see the list of every single supporter. And what I'm so proud about is not only the number of supporters, which is amazing, but the diversity of the supporters. We have lots of folks from law enforcement. We have the California Police Chiefs Association, which is all the chiefs in the state. We have former Chief Heather Fong, former Chief Tony Rivera, and lots of members of SFPD have signed on to this campaign. And then we have pages and pages of community and advocacy leaders, people like Gina and Sunny and many of you who I've worked with repeatedly over the years have signed on to this campaign. Most people running a campaign like this are either the law enforcement candidate or the community candidate. I'm pulling significantly from both groups, and that's what we need to do to reform the system. Let me talk about educators as well. 6 of the 7 school board members, and I'm so glad to have Sandra and Kim Shree with us here today, have endorsed me. 6 of the 7 members of the Board of Education. In addition, the Teachers Union, United Educators of San Francisco, UESF, 6,000 plus strong, just endorsed our campaign. Now, why are all these educators interested in a DA's race? Well, it's because I talk about the fact we need to invest in schools, not in prisons, number one. And number two, the number one way to keep a young person from a life of crime is to help that young person get a high school diploma. And so the DA needs to look beyond the traditional and do anything that makes us safer, which is why I have such an incredibly diverse, wide array of support that I'm so proud of. So, what I want to talk about now is how you all can help. As I said at the beginning, the only reason we're in the position we're at right now is because of all of your support. It has been unbelievable to have 1,500 plus people. We've been doing house parties almost every night in other different parts of the city that many of you have hosted or come to. This is a very community-based grassroots campaign. That is what wins elections in San Francisco, and that is what we're doing with this campaign. And so give yourselves a hand for helping us get to where we are. So the way we're going to take this home, we have 5 months left until the election on November 8th, is because of all of you. We need to out-hustle, out-work, out-organize everybody else, and we have the infrastructure to do that, starting with 1,500 people. There are lots and lots of ways you all can help, and I know everybody has professional and family obligations. We have people helping, from full-time volunteers who are doing this all the time to people who are devoting 1 or 2 hours a week or 1 or 2 hours a month. Whatever works for you will and fits with your life will help us. And let me tell you the many ways you can help.